knit 1, knit 2, knit 3. There's my yarn over. Knit my yarn over, knit 2 together, and stop. I was doing it wrong. And this is the way that a beautiful pattern should be knit. I know someone's out there thinking like this girl's gone totally like woo-woo.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me for another podcast episode today. I've got a finished object, a long-term whip, a new cast on, and a couple of thoughts and ideas that I wanted to talk about today, as well as a couple of non-yarn acquisitions that I'm really excited to share with you. So I think we should go ahead and dive on in. If you've been with us before, then you might already recognize that I am wearing my finished object, which is the Asusena pullover designed by Claudia Quintanilla of Unit Toronto. I have been participating in the Asusena knit along, and this pattern, as well as the yarn, was gifted to me by Unit Toronto. I am so excited that this is done, not like it was a chore, but because I'm excited to see the finished object. This was knit up in Knitting for Olive. It was my first time using Knitting for Olive yarn, my first time knitting Colorwork at all, and I'm just so thrilled. So let's start by chatting about the sort of specs here. It was knit with 2 yarns held together, that being Knitting for Olive Merino and Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair, in the main color Brown Nougat with a contrast of cream. I knit this in the size large. I did not do a gauge swatch. I just kind of went in and things wound up working out for the best. So I did use the recommended needle sizes in the pattern. So the main body was knit on 4mm needles with the ribbing on 3.75mm needles. It is a circular yoke. You cast on with this beautiful crew neck, almost borderline boat neck, right? It comes out just a little bit further. So I think that this is such a flattering neckline, and then you increase into the lovely flowers that are featured on the yoke. Then you have miles of stockinette. There aren't even decreases in the sleeves until you get to the end. So it's a satisfying knit in that you get to be engaged with all of this color work in the yoke, but it really does go by fairly quickly. And then you just have this simple stockinette in the round until you reach the cuffs, where you're introduced with the color work again in this sort of mirroring of the scallop, and then the alternating colors in the rib on both the hem as well as the cuffs. This project, from start to off of the blocking mats, took a total of 23 days. Now, there is one key feature that mine is currently missing, and that is that a lot of this floral motif should be accented with little pearls. I just didn't get around to that yet, but I also don't think I'm going to have an opportunity to actually wear this sweater until the cooler months. So I'm going to put that part of this off for right now, but it is completely wearable without the beading. My goal with the beading is to, in fact, put little pearls. I wore my pearl earrings today in honor of that, but I would like to have those pearls in the color work to enhance and tidy up the color work that I've done. So as this was my first ever color work project, I've come away with a couple of thoughts, things that I've learned. First of all, I think that anytime you see the scallop motif, so on the collar here and then on the cuffs, I feel like I did a really nice job with that as far as my tension on the floats. Now, in a different place on the flowers, I knew that my tension in the floats and in catching my floats, all of that was very loose. And I had done that on purpose with a fear of being too tight. So I think if I'm going to have one or the other, it's better that it's too loose than too tight. But I do think that you can sort of see in between the main color back behind the floats running just because of how loose everything is. I don't think that a non-knitter would necessarily be offended by all of that. So I think I could get away with it. But I also feel like if I put those little pearls to sort of accentuate, especially the centers of the flowers, it will be very obvious that it is indeed a flower. So I think that'll be a fun project for later in the year when it comes time to actually wear this. I think I will be calling this my gingerbread man sweater because I do very much feel like a cute little frosted gingerbread man. And I'm okay with that. I think it's going to be a great holiday sweater. I think in the before and after blocking photos, you can see just the absolute magic of blocking in this one. I wanted a sweater that was a little bit more close fitting than I typically go for. And that really just means that it should be sort of floating around my body, but by no means that I want it actually hugging my body. And I do think in the before, you can see that it was on my body a little bit more. I would almost say that before blocking, it was neutral to maybe like a dot of negative ease in some places. And I didn't think that that was a bad thing, but I definitely was hoping it would block out just a little bit bigger. And I also was pretty shocked that the sleeves were, they were very short before blocking. But I made it clear that I really wanted bracelet length sleeves on this one so that I could have the option to work in it. And I just didn't feel like it was the kind of sweater I would want to be like rolling the sleeves up on. You would lose all this really pretty shaping and then the color work, of course. So I wanted something that was bracelet length. I really said I wanted it to hit me just at this little pointy part of my wrist bone, and it does now. So blocking, if you don't block your knits, you gotta do it. You gotta do it. It makes all the difference. I especially feel like because I didn't gauge swatch for this one, the fit is rather impressive. I also went into this thinking I was going to knit the extra large, but after looking at project photos and the sizing again and referring to some of my other sweaters or garments in my wardrobe that fit the way I wanted this to fit, I sort of cultivated all of that information to make a better decision, I felt like, for the fit. And I'm really glad that I did. I think that for a sweater that's a little more formal for my wardrobe, this is definitely going to be a little bit more of a dressy piece. It is beneficial to have a slightly closer fitting garment. That being said, this didn't use up much yarn at all. Once again, thank you to Unit Toronto for gifting the yarn for this project. I am a little bit shocked at how much I have left over. Now, I did knit this to the sort of garment measurements that I had in mind, but it wound up pretty much matching up exactly with the pattern instructions. So for this size large, I wound up using or tapping into 4 balls each of the main color in the merino and soft silk mohair, and then a single ball of the contrast color in both the merino and soft silk mohair. What a tongue twister. So in total, this garment weighs 340 grams. She's a little feather. And I have plenty of yarn left over, more than I was expecting. So I think that they were generous in the amount that they gave me for the extra large size. And then when I decided to drop down the size, I just wound up with that much more left over. So I'll have to find a plan for that remaining yarn. But that being said, if you have been looking for a garment to use these yarns, or if you have a little ball of merino and soft silk mohair, or just a small amount of that yarn kicking around, I think this is a perfect way to utilize it because you really don't use a ton of the contrast color for the color work and the yoke and the cuffs. As this yarn was gifted, my project total, it was gifted. So I did not pay anything for this project. Of course, when I buy the beads, that will be an expense, but we're going to pick those up at Michael's for a couple bucks. However, had I purchased all of this yarn at full price, it would have cost about $115 to create. And I definitely think that that is more than I typically spend on a garment. I mean, it is. It's not, I think. That is more than I would typically spend on a garment. So I am really happy to have been able to test out these fibers and this yarn. That being said, I'm comparing it to the drops mohair that I've used before, and I actually went and kind of like felt them both up against my skin so that I could give you a little bit of feedback comparing the Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair to the drops kid silk mohair. And I do feel like this is a way softer option. For full disclosure, I am not wearing anything under this but the proper undergarments. This is on my skin completely, and I'm hot. I'm sweating in here right now, but it's not irritating me at all. It's present on my skin. I know it's there, but I am not bothered by this in the slightest. So whereas I do feel like my garment I've knit with the drops mohair, I've never worn it right next to skin, but in trying it on, I have, and it's definitely got a little bit more of a prickliness to it. That being said, it is a great option if you're not going to wear it next to skin. And so do with that information what you will. I'm really thrilled with this. I just loved how lightweight it was, the way that the merino blocked out. I think it plumped up so nicely. It's a very fine strand to work with, but it definitely does swell up a bit in blocking. And I don't know, I'm just really thrilled with it. So I think that that's all of the stats. If you have any questions, definitely let me know if I missed anything there. But otherwise, I'm just really happy with how this turned out. And I know now that I do need to tighten up my floats and color work. But for a first time, I'm very happy. I will definitely get wear out of this in the cooler months. I could see myself styling this in many different ways, but like I said, definitely a bit more formal. I think it would look particularly nice with like a midi length skirt and tucked in, or to wear a little bit more casually, maybe with just some white jeans and boots. I could also picture myself wearing this with maybe more of like a flowy pant and a heel, and really kind of just giving that, I don't know, I feel like it's a little bit old money, like I like it. So that is what I have here as my finished object, the Asusena it's a rough day for words, huh? The Asusena pullover by Claudia Quintanilla of Unit Toronto. The knit along is still running. I never remember the date, but I think through May something. So I'll definitely make sure it's here. And yeah, I'm happy with it. The pattern was beautifully written too. So could not recommend it enough. Now, moving on into whips, we can chat about the whip that has been on my needles the longest. And that is my sand cardigan by Maria Isayeva of Ulin Knitwear. And I am knitting this cardigan out of Nora in the colorway 01 Sake. We definitely did we had some change up this week. So let's take a peek. This is actually in maybe the absolute worst state to actually show you on camera what is happening. So this is a duster length cardigan and my sleeves are currently halfway knit and they are tied together with some try-on tubing. And then I have split 4 pockets. So there are pockets in the seams. There's no seam, but an inseam pocket is sort of the style that we've got going on. So I wound up knitting about an inch since last week on the body. Then I tried this on again and saw that I think it really was time for the pockets. So I went ahead and started that process. Now, I will say that for the pockets, basically when the sleeves were started, this is a very strange construction. You kind of work the back edge, the top back edge, then pick up for the fronts. Then as soon as you connect for the body, you're actually working the sleeves. And in the instructions for the sleeves, there is a step that tells you to place a stitch marker in the center of that underarm sleeve. It says to place a stitch marker in the center of the new cast on for the sleeve. And when I had done that, I was like, why am I doing this? This is just my beginning of round marker. So I wound up placing a marker as my beginning of round in the sleeve. So then obviously that was taken out, or it traveled down the sleeve as I knit down it. And then the other day, as I got to the point where I decided I was ready for pockets, I read the pattern and the instructions said to knit to the stitch marker. And I was like, what stitch marker? There is none. And I had to backtrack. And then I realized that the stitch marker I was told to place in between those sleeve stitches was actually supposed to be placed on the live stitches of the body in between the sleeve stitches. So essentially, I was supposed to be marking the body in the underarm and then working the entire length from the underarm to the pockets with that stitch marker in between, marking where the pockets would be. Now, I feel like that's a lot of hassle to not have to be dealing with that stitch marker on both sides while working the body. So what I would suggest to do if you're knitting this pattern is just place the stitch marker in between those 2 stitches, but secure it to the work so that then when it comes time to knit to the stitch marker, you could just follow that column of stitches up and transfer that placement. Now, because I hadn't done that, and then I thought I was being savvy and just looking at the numbers for how many stitches I had in the front panels versus the back panel to find my pocket placement, I didn't consider those extra stitches from under the sleeve. And so I've actually placed my pockets maybe a pinch more forward than they're supposed to be. I tried it on when I finished the first panel. So basically now you're just kind of knitting flat on the front panels and the backs until you get to the depth of the pocket, at which point you're going to join everything again. I tried it on to see if it was going to be a hindrance. As of right now, I'm almost thinking it's actually going to be to my benefit. I could be wrong. It might be an issue. But where my seam for that pocket wound up being is placed slightly more forward. So instead of it sitting directly on my hip, which is of course the widest part that this whole cardigan has to travel over, I think it's actually going to sit sort of just in front of my hip. And in doing that, maybe I'm going to avoid having extra bulk of pockets sitting on my hips. We'll find out. I figured after I had done the front panel here, so you could see that this is where the pocket's going to go. Like I said, I tried it on. I kind of tested it out. It seems like it would work. So I figured I would just go ahead and wrap up the rest of it and then try it on one more time and double check. If it is an issue, I don't mind ripping back. This is a long-term whip. I don't think I even said yet how long it's been on the needles. As of today, this has been on the needles for 67 days, and it's been through it. In those 67 days, we've encountered a lot. But right now, it's just kind of hard to show because I am in the process of working the depth of the pocket across the back panel. So I hope that makes sense. If you've ever sewn those integrated inseam pockets before, then I think it's pretty obvious how this happens. And also, if you've ever done a split hem, it's the same idea. It's just that you're going to close it back up to knit in the round after the depth of the pocket is done. So hopefully by next week, I will have wrapped that up. I did have to deviate a little bit from this being my simply soccer watching knitting. And I had to just put a little more outside time into figuring out the placement of everything. So since then, I've just been knitting across the back while watching soccer. And I think it's hard to tell even how much progress has been made because I have my progress keeper here. And so back here, I have maybe 3 or 4 inches of progress, but I've also knit the full depth of the pocket on the front panels. So for now, I'll go ahead and just move the progress keeper and we'll just see what happens next week. And so between now and next week, the goal is to wrap up the back and forth on the back panel, as well as then I have the other front panel to do and get back to knitting in the round on this one. Or not in the round, flat, but all connected. I don't know if any of that made sense. That is the sand cardigan. And yeah, really still enjoying it. If you had seen last week's video, then you would have seen I was planning to cast on a new project this week. And so I had done my swatching last week. And this is part of my Stash Bust Spring knit along. Actually, I could use this moment to touch base for a quick second on the knit along. So from now until June 21st, I am hosting my first knit along Stash Bust Spring. The idea, the intention is to knit through some stash yarn and not purchase new yarn to knit up this season. The whole point is just to work through some of those skeins that have maybe been left to dwindle in your stash a little too long. So we'll be running the knit along until June 21st, like I said, at which point I will be giving away some prizes. I've been very fortunate that I've had some people donate prizes, and I'm really excited to tell you all about that just when the date gets a little bit closer. For now, what I wanted to say, because I realized as it is my first knit along, I was maybe a little bit I don't think I had all of my details straight that I didn't even realize I needed to have. So I think when it comes time for prizes, we're going to wind up having 4 winners. 2 of those will be picked from YouTube and 2 of those will be picked from Instagram. As the date approaches, I will have a video at the end of the knit along where you'll be able to comment #StashBustSpring and let us know what projects you worked on with your stash yarn. I would then consider any project that you worked on with stash. It does not have to be a finished object. It can absolutely be a whip, but each individual project will count as an entry for the prizes. And then on Instagram, we will have similarly a post where you'll be able to comment #StashBustSpring with the same sort of idea of which projects you worked on, and each individual project will be entered as a prize. Then also on Instagram, in the #StashBustSpring that anyone can follow and check out at any time, there will be a winner selected at random from there. So for the best opportunity to win prizes, you'll probably want to just enter yourself in all of those different avenues. And so you can currently start entering yourself by using #StashBustSpring on Instagram. You will then be able to comment on those specific videos, and I'll make it very clear which one it is, one video, one post, and then I'll be able to pick winners at random from there. But someone asked the question, and I realized I didn't make that clear because I didn't even know what was going on. It is my first knit along, so I hope you understand. But I think that that gives everyone the most fair chance. In the meantime, I would love for you to just comment with #StashBustSpring anyway on here so that we can see just what you're working on and stay with the community. And so those are the details for #StashBustSpring. If there are any other questions, please let me know, and I'll definitely make sure to make that more clear in the future. Anyway, the project I'm working on now is part of #StashBustSpring, and it is my Florence tank by Sari Nordland. I am knitting this in some mystery thrifted yarn. It was on a cone. The cone said DK, Cashmerino, Verde Musco, and I'm not entirely sure what all it's actually made up of, but it's a really beautiful green color, and I thought would make the perfect sort of spring vest style. I knew that I wanted to make a sweater vest tank. I have a couple of store-bought and thrifted sweater vests that I wear as tank tops in the spring and summer. I find them to be really comfortable, and they look a little bit nicer than just wearing a tank top out and about. So I knew I wanted to knit this yarn into something like that. I had a few stipulations. One of them, and the most important, being that it was going to be bra friendly, but also it had to accommodate the amount of yarn that I had, which I believe I have 300 grams of this yarn. So we're going to find out if that's enough. I was hoping to knit something that would have been top down, so I would have a better way of gauging just how much yarn I've used and have. But right now I'm just trusting the process because it's bottom up, and we'll have to see where this goes. I also thought originally that if I ran out of this yarn, I have a sort of similar color yarn that I could have used to pick up and knit the button band. However, the button band is fully integrated, and I didn't want to mess with that in the pattern. So we are really just going for it here, and I'm okay with that. We'll just see what happens. This is the project that I have a lot to talk about today. So I'll start by showing you what progress we've made in the 4 days since I cast this on. Here we go. I don't know that you'll be able to see. I'll have to definitely take some close-ups. And right now, I'm going to hold this kind of folded in half. I am knitting this in the recommended needles, also the needles that I swatched with, which is the 3.75 millimeter needle. And I have decided to knit this in the size 5. Now, already, couple things. First, I did gauge swatch, which is great. I'm terrible at reading my gauge swatch in lace. I have no idea what I was doing. So I think if I was reading it right, and if you have tips for checking your gauge in lace, please let us know, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm pretty sure my gauge was being knit at a slightly smaller size, so more stitches per inch than what the pattern recommends. So when I had done my gauge swatch, I did bounce around the idea of dropping my needle size because I thought maybe the fabric was too open. But after doing my best to read the gauge, I decided to stick with the needle size that I had. It was fine. I just thought if I had the opportunity to drop a needle size, I wouldn't have minded that either. So I stuck with the same needle size and decided to knit. Basically, it was in between two sizes, and so I went for the size up. We'll see what we do with that. I also had mentioned that this yarn does have a strange feeling to it. And I thought maybe it was the whole it has spinning oil on it thing. But then I started thinking about that more, and it really isn't that. If anything, this yarn almost feels very dry to me. As a hairstylist, I kind of want to give it like a conditioning treatment. So if that means anything to you, maybe you could let me know what you would do in this situation. Like I said, I don't know the fiber makeup, but I just know what I'm feeling, and it just almost has this very dry feeling to it. In the swatch, it bothered me a bit more, but in the actual knitting of this, it's been a lot easier to work with. So it doesn't bother me. And now that I've kind of like gotten used to it, I'm okay with the way that it feels. I also, I swear there's something else I wanted to say before I jumped into the rest of this. Okay. Let's just go ahead and talk about it. So I started this 4 days ago. I cast on and I had knit the ribbing, and then I spent a day knitting the lace. And I made it through the full chart repeat once, and then went to knit it again, and I was having a lot of issues. First of all, it took forever for me to knit up that initial repeat. I don't think that there was a single row that I just knit right the first time and didn't have to tink back. So I literally knit the whole thing twice over, but would knit a row, unknit the row, reknit the row. It was taking a long time. Made it through the first repeat, got to the second repeat, and something didn't look right, and it just wasn't lining up. So then I spent another day unknitting and trying to reknit, and things weren't working. And then I was frustrated. I was getting angry at it. And then yesterday I decided to just frog. I frogged. I couldn't find where I had made a mistake that was causing the rest of this pattern to be thrown off. And I thought maybe to make things easier, I should put stitch markers in between the repeats across the row. But that doesn't exactly work because the lace repeat is sort of done in this bricklay type pattern. So those stitch markers would only work for a few rows, and then I would wind up having to move all of those stitch markers. And that's just not a fun way to knit something. So I couldn't find the mistake. I decided to frog it all. And then I was really frustrated with it. And I decided to yesterday sit down and I turned everything off. I didn't listen to music, my audiobook. I didn't listen to podcasts. I just sat here in silence and I said out loud what I was doing. Knit, yarn over, out loud. And I tried to find a rhythm that worked. And eventually I was sort of easing into it. And my frustration was subsiding and things were getting easier and more smooth. And I started thinking a little bit more about it. First of all, I think that I've been in like a cleaning mode the past week. So I actually haven't even done a ton of knitting. I finished this and got some other things done, but really did not spend a ton of time knitting. I just wanted to clean. It's spring cleaning time. So I feel like my mind was not in my knitting, and therefore I probably should have cast on a stockinette project. But I was really excited to work on this. But my brain and my hands were not talking to each other in such a way that was conducive to knitting lace. And then I also think I was just like, well, let's just do it anyway, and we'll kind of get this one out of the way because it'll be pretty quick, right? It's lace, it has no sleeves, it'll be a quick project. And so I had been listening to things and not really fully paying attention to this. And so it was very much just boom, 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 get to the end of the row. All right, looks good, move on to the next one. And so somewhere obviously along the way, I messed that up. And when I decided that I was not going to fight with it anymore and I was just going to actually sit down and knit it the way it was meant to be knit, I realized that, okay, if you've ever played an instrument before, or if you've ever watched someone play an instrument before, you see professional musicians. And when they're playing, think of someone playing the violin. When you play the violin, a professional, you usually see them sort of moving with the music, right? And sort of feeling it. And I sort of have a point here. But there's like this really beautiful motion that's happening, and them and the instrument are working together to create this beautiful sound. If you watch a professional pianist, they're usually moving with the music, and there's like a beauty in the way that they're moving and how that's translating through the piano and then out to the listener's ear. And I started to sort of think of knitting this way, where here I was with this beautiful lace pattern that I was frustrated and I was trying to move through it quickly. And so when I stopped and decided that I was going to really focus on this, I sort of started thinking of knitting like a musician plays an instrument. And instead of just inserting my needle and trying to breeze through the row, I started to think of like picking up this stitch and wrapping my yarn around it, maybe romanticizing my knitting a little bit. And when I started doing that and moving with a rhythm in the repeat, things got easier and they looked better and it felt better. And it felt a little silly, but it's a beautiful lace pattern. Shouldn't it be done with a sense of beauty in the way of it? And I know someone's out there thinking like, this girl's gone totally like woo. But when I did that, I was also able to read the knitting. And instead of just looking at the chart and doing what the chart says, I was able to look at the chart and say, okay, what are the sort of key factors here that as I'm knitting the stitches across the row, I can recognize that my lace pattern is lining up without having to put stitch markers in. What can I use as my benchmark to know that I've made it to the end of the repeat and I've knit all of that correctly? And as with a lot of lace knitting, there are yarn overs in this. And they're very obvious on the needle, right? Your yarn over, when you're going to knit it, it's much different from the rest of the stitches. So I decided that my yarn over would be my benchmark. And I would know that in the very first time I knit the repeat, I read the chart and I knit 1, 2, 3. There's my yarn over. okay, on the 4th stitch, I have to be knitting the yarn over. And that's how I know that the pattern's going to line up. Those aren't the actual numbers. I'm not going to tell them to you. It's a paid for pattern. You know the drill. But let's make believe that that is what was going on. So I would say, okay. And I would knit like a musician would play an instrument. And I would say, 1, knit, knit 2, knit 3. There's my yarn over, knit the yarn over, knit 2 together and stop. Now do it again. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3. There's my yarn over, knit my yarn over, knit 2 together and stop. And it became this little dance that admittedly felt a little ridiculous, but it kept me engaged in the lace pattern. There was something sort of fun about romanticizing the way that I felt while I was knitting instead of just, how quickly can I get through this row? Knit, 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 get to the end. Oh, there's an extra stitch. Who cares? I'll figure that out later. Move on to the next one. Hey, this isn't working out. Well, that's okay. I'm sure it'll all work itself out. Like, no. That wound up taking so much longer than it did to reknit. I mean, literally, I have now just about caught up to where I had frogged back from. And this took me a few hours, whereas that literally took me 2 days. And a lot of frustration and a lot of unknitting and reknitting and just, And then that was the other thing was when I had done a couple of rows and I could feel my mind sort of wandering and thinking about other things and not performing my beautiful knitting dance, I put it down and I walked away. I was in a cleaning mood. So I put it down and I went and I reorganized the shelves in the in the linen closet, That was just, I had to recognize that this is not something you could just breeze through. It's lace and it's beautiful. So you should knit it beautifully. And I did. And it was fun. And then I started looking forward to it. And because I was speaking these things out loud, I didn't have my inner monologue going, thinking about all the other things I've got going on or wandering off. So I was able to stay on track. And I don't know if this is too woo and out there for you, but I thought maybe there's someone else who's struggling with knitting lace or just, stockinette even. If you're constantly just knitting your stockinette so mindlessly, imagine taking one row of that and just knitting it with the same rhythm and sort of fluidity that someone playing an instrument would. I don't know. Something to think about. I thought I would share because I actually had a sort of laugh out loud moment when it all clicked to me and I was knitting and I thought, I was doing it wrong. And this is the way that a beautiful pattern should be knit. So I am no longer trying to rush through this. I am very happy with where I'm at so far. I think when I get to the end of this next repeat I'm working on, I'm going to weigh my yarn, see how much yarn it's taking for a full repeat, and maybe then I can gauge to make sure I'm going to have enough yarn and figure out what I'm doing at that point. But honestly, right now, I'm not even too concerned about the end result. I just want to enjoy the knitting of this because I think that for this project, that's more important to me. So that's what I have to say about it. Of course, Sari Nordland's patterns are beautifully written, and this one is no exception. You start with that bottom edge and work your way up. Everything is integrated, so there's nothing to go back and do at the end. You have your buttonholes already worked into the pattern, and it's going really well so far. So I am excited. I'll have to put a project or progress keeper on this, and I'll get to that after I'm done filming today. I just don't have one handy. But that is where we're at. I hope maybe you can learn from my mistakes here. And I don't know, give it a shot. Try romanticizing your knitting this week and see how it goes. I think you'll be surprised to see maybe just how stuck in that rush or that productivity complex. I know I have that where I'm like, I have to be productive at all times. And this week I said, no, just do it nicely. And I think it really paid off. So yeah, I just thought I'd share. Anyway, that's the Florence tank by Sari Nordland. It's been a whip now for 4 days. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, I do have a couple of non-yarn acquisitions. Now, I did just also mention that this week has been very focused on sort of spring cleaning for me. It's just where my head was at. I'm really glad I took the time to do it. But I also, in doing that, I am the kind of person, if something doesn't have a home to be returned to, it's going to wind up getting piled up somewhere. And then it's going to bother me. And so I decided to invest in a few homes for things this week. And I thought I'd share them with you. First one being, when it comes to blocking my knits, I have been using just a regular sort of storage tub and blocking my knits in there in the bathtub. I just find it a lot easier. It's a smaller container of water. It's definitely leak proof. And also, the only thing that goes in there has been my knitting, so I don't feel like I have to scrub my tub every time I go to block something. Now, that being said, I've been blocking things at such a rate that the tub has decided to live in the bathroom, and it has been driving me absolutely insane. So I decided to let that go back to actually storing some yarn on a shelf and instead get one of these thingies, which is one of those collapsible tubs. This one even has the drain. I'll definitely make sure to link it below. But basically, it's a little bit stiff and tricky to do, but it does just kind of pop out. So it winds up being a pretty big, a good-sized tub. And then I can just fold it up flat and actually stick it in the corner of the bathroom. So that's so much better for me. I picked this one up on Amazon. Very simple, but I thought I'd let you know if you've never seen one of these things before. And so I have yet to use it, but I also figured the tub that I was using, I had to wait for my boyfriend to come and help me dump out the water because it just got so heavy. And so this one, at least I could just drain it when it's done. I thought that was way more convenient. And yeah, just thought I'd point that out. So that's the first acquisition. The second one, I will admit, I was a little bit more excited about. And I don't know, it was just, I felt pretty savvy here. So in my cleaning, like I said, things didn't have a home. I decided to get a little sort of, it's just a small table to go next to my sort of knitting chair, and it has shelves underneath it. So now I can store my whips there and they have a home. But also with that, I realized that I have my needle binder and all of my little notions and things, and I tend to knit all around the house. So what was happening is I would wind up having to, corral all of these things sort of at night when I went to go knit in bed. And then in the morning, I'd have to have all these things again that I'm carrying up and down the stairs and around the house. And I just was like, this is ridiculous. And then I was walking through Home Goods, and I saw something that I thought might be perfect. And it is. Check this out. Okay. This is actually a utensils organizer for like an outdoor meal. So there's 3 small compartments here for your forks, knives, and spoons, and then 1 longer compartment in the back for napkins. And this has a handle that you can drop down so you have full access to everything inside. But then if you're going to travel up and down or around the house, you could just pick up the handle and everything's inside. And this is the greatest thing that's happened to me. So it's the perfect size for me to put my Black Pearl Magic needle binder in the napkin side. And then in the front, I'm going to get just a little like cup or something that I could put into one of these for when I want to just drop some stitch markers and not actually have to put them inside of a container, and then they won't get lost or come out through the basket holes. But otherwise I have, please don't spill on me. I have my scissors. These were some needles that I just wasn't ready to put away yet. So I just chucked them in the pocket. My stitch markers, my measuring tape, and my tapestry needles. It's all just in there, and I can very quickly and easily grab these things and then drop them back in, and they have a home. And it fits perfectly on my new little table because it was nice and narrow. So I just felt pretty clever with that. I think you would see these at the thrift store even quite a bit, but I particularly like this one because the handle drops. They had some others where the handle was stable in the middle, and I just thought for access sake, it wasn't the greatest, but really love this. This is $8, and I will see if I can find some similar ones on Amazon, because already this has been a game changer, and especially because I have my iPad here, and at night now, I just put the iPad in, I hold the handle, I kind of hold the iPad up, otherwise it is a little lopsided, although I guess that does work. And I could just grab this in my bag, my project bag, and I'm good to go. Isn't that nice? I don't know. I thought I'd share because it was pretty exciting. Like a little toolbox for your knitting things, if you will. So those are the acquisitions. Anyway, I think that that's all I have to share with you this week. As I did mention, I felt like I needed a stockinette project. Basically, everything was just in a very thinky place, and this is how my knitting tends to go. I don't know about you, but everything will be very sort of boring and on the same page. And then suddenly, like, the cardigan needs pockets. The new cast on is in the lace section. This is done. So I didn't have anything to just grab and knit on. And that's a problem for me. So I'm reviewing my spring knitting plans and realizing that there really wasn't anything that was just stockinette in the round. That's very rude of me to do to myself. So I'm toying back and forth with what I'd like to cast on over the next week, but it's definitely going to be something with at least the majority stockinette in the round. I'm thinking perhaps my stripy sweater with some of my stash yarn, or maybe that little vest, but that seems a bit more thinky to me. So I'm kind of just evaluating what I was thinking there, or even going back to the stash and revisiting to see if there's anything that I could just turn into a stockinette in the round project. We'll have to see, because I definitely feel it when I don't have something like that on my needles. So if you had seen my spring knitting plans video and have any ideas for just a plain stockinette project for those yarns I had shown you, maybe let me know, because I'm feeling a little lost without something stockinette. So I'm going to just revisit those plans and my stash and see what I could put together to knit on something stockinette in the round. So those are kind of the plans for the week. And otherwise, I think that's all I have for you today. Before I let you go, I will just say a huge thank you, because we hit a pretty crazy milestone in the past week, which I can't even say it out loud. We hit 9,000 subscribers on here, and that is insane to me. So I just will never find enough words. It's a big, big thank you. When I say a big thank you for coming and hanging out with me, and just, yeah, for being here week after week, especially to those of you who have been from the beginning. It really does mean a lot to me. So thank you so much. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, knitting content in general, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you would subscribe and ring that bell. That way you are notified every time I post a video, though I definitely post every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, my weekly podcast, and then sprinkle in some in between. So definitely make sure that you have the bell rung so that you're always notified when those extra videos are dropped in. Otherwise, big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.